I wasn't expecting it to come back 3 years before the Sydney Games. I wasn't a diabetic all my life. Coming down with diabetes on that sort of regime seemed to be a bit harsh at the time.
Your management of those sporting accomplishments, despite the presence of type 1 diabetes. So again, the formation of an autoimmune disorder that meant you had to actively inject insulin to control your sugar through that career.
To clarify that, I only became a diabetic 3 years before Sydney. So I wasn't a diabetic all my life. Seems like I'm falling apart. But even in my rowing days, I had ulcerative colitis as a sufferer just before the Barcelona Games. And when I was put onto the medication of that, I had diabetes symptoms for about 2-3 weeks. And I was told that later in life, it could come back. I wasn't expecting it to come back 3 years before the Sydney Games. My grandfather had diabetes in his late 60s, early 70s, and I was very young and knew it was in the sort of family line, but never, because everyone sort of says, especially of being active, of doing a sport, of being as active as you possibly can is a good thing. Well, when you're training 3-4 times a day, every day, 7 days a week, 49 weeks a year, a day off once every 3 weeks, is that I think I was doing my fair share of exercise. So coming down with diabetes on that sort of regime seemed to be a bit harsh at the time.
I would agree. And the challenge there is when we look at, is performance the same as well-being? That's an awful lot of stress. When we look at the amount of load you've put into your body consistently, that is, and we're going to talk today a bit about recovery. And stress gets misused as a word, but that's an awful lot of load.
You talk about performance, that's misused as well, because there's so many different factors involved in performance. People will try and pin it down to one or two things. Without coming up with too many facts and figures and labouring on the diabetes, is that of 10% of women during pregnancy come down with diabetes. 2% of that 10% will stay as a diabetic, or it will come back later in life. And if you think of the stress that their body goes through in pregnancy, is that you can understand that sort of process when they talk about type 2 diabetes and people that are obese. It's obesity that's causing the diabetes. I'm non-scientific, but my theories on it is that because they're overweight, they're putting stress on their body, and that's bringing out the weak gene of diabetes that's causing the problems from that. So it's a lifestyle thing.
It's a lifestyle. And again, everything is a bit of genes and a bit of lifestyle. The question is the ratio of those two things. But again, that will be a fascinating separate podcast. I've got to get you to energy. Otherwise, our listeners will be like, when's the energy discussion? But this all ties in, because glucose control is a key part of energy. Training volume's a key part of energy, accomplishment. And I think, I want to almost have two versions of you. I want you to think of your energy now, and let's think over the last 6 weeks, because you've had a pretty busy recent period. But last 6 weeks, rating your energy between 100, which is effervescent, everything you could ever need, and that's not just physical energy, Steve. That's also emotional energy, psychological energy. That greater sense of purpose. 0 is total absence of energy. Where is Steve now? This last few weeks.
I would say relatively on the low side.
Okay.
I'm not a brilliant sleeper. I've never been a brilliant sleeper since I was probably of 10. And a lot of athletes get really hung up about sleep. And my attitude is the body is pretty amazing. If it needs sleep, it will shut down and you'll take it. But you'll get certain athletes who say, "Oh, I didn't get my 8 or 10 hours of sleep. I'm not going to perform." And then the mental side of that then takes over, not what they see as being a lack of sleep.
Your great-grandparents got something from drinking water that you probably don't. Over the last century, we've made water safer to drink, on the whole, but something has been lost in the process. Natural water sources once provided essential minerals that our bodies evolved with over thousands of years. Today's water, even premium bottled at source water, contains 78% fewer minerals than it did just a century ago. In fact, you'd have to drink 1.5 bathtubs to replenish the minerals that you lose in a litre of sweat. So if you think your water is hydrating you optimally, think again. Pure Sport, a company that I personally trust and use, solves this problem for high performers through their ultra electrolytes, a science-backed ratio of electrolytes in one single sachet. Optimize your hydration and leave the bath for bathing. Use our exclusive discount code EE10 at www.puresport.co for 10% off.
My sport was high training, 3 to 4 training sessions a day, muscular endurance, so of working on your endurance levels all the time, but you've got to be physically strong with that as well. So it's crossing over several energy sources from that. And the reality is, when you come to major championships, some of the regattas leading into it is that we would train through because we're looking to the end goal, not the short-term goal. But when you get to the end goal, the Olympics of every 4 years, your training gets tapered down for the sort of 3 or 4 weeks coming into it.
Yes.
So you've got all this energy. You feel that you've got all this energy. You're not physically tired from the volume of training you've been doing. So sleeping then becomes a big issue with that as well, because you're not physically tiring yourself out to where you have been doing for the 4 years before leading up to that that point. And
well, I'd also want to. What was your energy then? I want to come back to that. But if it's now, so taking you now, you've got this ice dancing commitment. You've got all your, other roles and responsibilities. Sleep isn't great. We're going to touch on it. But if you had to give yourself a score out of 100, you said not great. Give me a number I can work with.
I would say of how I'm feeling at this particular moment, I would say probably 30. As an athlete, you almost spend all your time tired because you're pushing yourself to the limits. And if your sport, as mine was muscular endurance, is that if you're an explosive athlete, the more tapering down and the building up the energy for a clean and jerk, for instance, is that if you do any exercise leading into that, is that you're then draining the energy away from that. When you look at endurance athletes and you'll talk to marathon runners won't have a day off or very rarely have a day off. Because as soon as they are not training, their endurance levels quickly change and start disappearing. Yeah. So you've got to tick over all the time. And so we're a crossover of two. You've got to have a reasonable amount of power, but it's mainly the endurance side of it. And so that if you missed a day, as I said a little bit earlier, that a day off every 3 weeks, and you're thinking, God, yes, no, I can't wait until that next day off, because mentally you need that release.